pages. Okay, so how do you put wheels on this? What do you actually do with it? I'd like you to retrieve the Planning Pages worksheet from Canvas. So in Canvas, I put together kind of a worksheet I call Planning Pages, and I like to talk about its use because it's really the major activity I'd like you to engage in when I go through the instructions here with you. I do this quite often with faculties at schools that are really effective at traditional instruction, that are doing a good job, but are recognizing that that good job isn't working equally well for all students. And so while they're typically schools that are pretty effective in a lot of respects, they're looking for how they can blend learning. They're looking for how they can make better use of instructional assets. But at the same time, they're coming from a traditional model of instruction. Typically, they've been, in the days of Madeline Hunter, they moved to the five-step lesson plan, and they've kind of stayed there since. So when they think about instruction, they really think of it as a very structured, sequential kind of thing, and the stage on the stage does still impact it. Now, there are a lot of good things about that, but I'd like to just start our exploration of technology and learning by thinking about the ways that we could use some of these activities in the context of the strengths of a traditional school, but to start moving them. So I'm going to do the first thing I do, which is I ask people to focus on one lesson they're going to do. And we're going to spend a great deal of time planning that one lesson, thinking about that one lesson. Now you're looking at the vantage point of someone who either is or is going to be a school principal or a school leader. And I'd like you to think about another way I like to use this process is with teachers who are really having a hard time figuring out where to go with their classroom. Or I've observed the classroom and I'm finding it's really not working for a lot of the students, or um, they're really not getting where they want to go. So one of the things I like to do is actually sit and go through this process with them, so that they can kind of see, okay, well, how would we rethink what we do in the classroom? How would you create lessons that might be more effective given whatever it is you're trying to do? So if you look at those sheets, we're going to go through, basically what I'm going to ask you to do is think about a planning process that uses assessment of, for, and as learning in a blended learning model. And so this really amounts to filling out some blanks, and it's really just a worksheet, but it's a worksheet that helps us think through the lesson. So I'd like to think about just identify who are you going to teach and what is the topic going to be. That's going to be the starting point. And so just put out, who's the teacher, what grade are they teaching, what subject are they teaching, and you'll see that there's a tan-colored box. In that tan-colored box, I'd just like you to write out, what do you think the topic's going to be? What is it you really want to focus on for that day of instruction, and just kind of get that identified in the tan box there for a second. Now, you notice I haven't used the word outcomes yet. I just want you to think about what's the topic, what's the thing that you want to teach about. So you're going to do that, and then after we do that, now we're going to move to the outcome question. So what do you think is your outcome for the day? Well, I'm going to ask you to think about it a couple ways. Now, for the third time for this session, I'm going to mention, when we talk about learning at higher levels, what we really mean is moving from acquisition, where you're able to perform something correctly given an infinite amount of time, to fluency, where you can do it quickly, to maintenance, where you can do it without reteaching, to generalization, where you can use it in other environments. Now, if you think about that for a second, that means if I think about my outcome, I think, well, what is it I want to do? What skill do I want to increase, something they're able to do? What knowledge do I want to increase, something they know? What attitudes do I want to change that will give them a better disposition for learning? What beliefs do I want them to change that get in the way or would help or support? Or what habits do they need? Now, what would make it permanent? That is, you'd have it forever. If you learn something and you don't remember it, it doesn't much matter if you ever had it. And what would make it portable? What would allow you to take it to other places and use it? So the first thing I like to think about is, what's an outcome that you're interested in? What would make it permanent and portable? Permanent, maintain the learning. Portable, take it wherever you need it, generalize it. And what standard does this relate to in the Common Core and the state standards, whichever set of standards you're using for a particular school? I'd like to ask two other questions about this. What previous learning have students had? What did students do in previous courses and previous years to prepare them for this? And what are they doing in future years and future places to prepare them for this? Well, out of all these considerations, actually, in the pink block on your right, what I'd like you to put down is the actual target behavior for your outcome. What is the behavior that you will be able to observe? Remember, behavior is an action that's discrete. It has a definite beginning and end. What's the behavior you want to see change, or the meaning you want constructed? What specifically is it that you're going to target for this outcome? Now, let's, for the next time, really look more formally. Okay, so let's think about where this is. What level of learning is the behavior you just identified at? Is it an acquisition behavior with an infinite amount of time you can do this? Is it a fluency behavior? You're able to do this quickly? Is it a maintenance behavior? You're able to do this without reteaching? Or is this a generalization behavior? You're able to take this and do it in whole new places. And if it's whatever level, how would you move it to the next level, and the next level, and the next level? Now, one of the things I find useful in class instruction is for people to think about, okay, I asked you to think about your target behavior, where you want to be at the end of instruction in the previous pink block. Now in the green block, I'd like you to think about where they should be about a third of the way through a class period. So I want you to imagine that you were checking understanding about 15 minutes into a 45-minute class period, or 20 minutes into an hour class period. And so you identified, if this is the outcome I want at the end, where do I want them after 15 minutes? So what kind of understanding do I want them to have? What task would tell me they have it? Under what conditions could I actually observe that task and know very quickly, just watching at the class, whether they have it or not? And what would be my criteria for knowing that they have it? So what I'd like you to do is take a minute and just sort of identify quickly in a couple words what that understanding and task and condition and criteria would be in the olive-colored box that you see. Now, you remember that assessment is the gathering of education and relevant data for the purpose of making a decision to benefit the child. Okay, remember that definition? So here's the thing. After about 15 minutes at a point in instruction, I have basically 6 things I can do. I see where they are a third of the way into the class, and that means at this point I can, on the basis of how I see any given individual student doing, I can either move, that is, this person's getting it, they're way ahead, they already have this, may not even have needed it, but they're ready to move on to this and something beyond this, something else. Second possibility is that they're doing just what I thought. This is exactly where they need to be. The rest of this lesson is going to be perfect for them. I just need to continue teaching them and they're going to get it. And then others I'll look at and say, well, they need a little reteaching. They're with me, but they're not quite solid on some of this. Maybe they could use a little more help, so I need to reteach some things with them. So the left column are people who basically are getting it and are ready to really move on with what you're doing. But the bottom classes, I want to know, well, who's really not with me? Who's really not getting it? And that amounts to students whose behavior now falls in 3 groups. They'll call me to do something different. Either they're not getting this and I need to step back. And so if I step back, it means I need to do this slower, I need to give more explanation, I need to give more support. I need to give them something else in what I'm doing if they're going to continue, if you're going to make progress with this. Then I have others who I have to start over. They're lost. They don't know what I'm doing, where I'm going, they don't know what's happening here. And I really need to start over with them and do it some other ways until they get it. And then, of even more concern to me, are those I have to rebuild. Someone who not only isn't with me, really has no idea what I'm doing, can't begin to do it because there are prerequisite tasks and abilities they just don't have. And I need to fill those in first. So if I think about how I make a decision-making rule, on the basis of that check after 15 minutes, I can decide, okay, what would I do next with the period? So now I want you to think about, for a second, who are your learners? What strengths and challenges do the kids you teach in general have? Let me just reflect on that for a second. But the major activity I want is to think about learning assets. I mentioned that in blended learning we use text, digital, face-to-face, and community assets for learning. For the outcome you wish to achieve on the topic you've chosen, understanding where you want them to be about a third of the way through instruction and where you want them to be at the end of instruction, what learning assets are available to doing this? What text assets do I have in textbooks and narratives and stories, nonfiction, whatever sources? What digital assets are there in terms of online activities, videos, podcasts, games, simulations, software we can use, apps that will help them do things, technologies to help them perform the tasks? What kind of digital assets are available to me? What kind of face-to-face assets? What could I do? What processes could I engage with students? How could I have them work? How could they work together in groups? How could they work in pairs? What kind of cooperative learning things can I do? What kind of consulting things can I do? What kind of face-to-face processes make sense for this? And finally, what community assets? What assets are there in their families, their neighborhoods, their surrounding community, the community at large that could be useful for learning here? So I'm looking at these kinds of assets, and at the same time I'm thinking about learning supports. So besides filling out those 4 color boxes for the 4 kinds of assets, I also think about, for students in that column who weren't quite getting it, what kind of learning supports, what kind of assets would support learning for students who are having difficulty? Oftentimes what I do here is I go back to the page we just left, and I start to circle the things that could be effective learning supports for people having difficulty, and then I just start thinking, well, if someone's not progressing, what is it that if I were to step back I could add, or that if I were to start over I could do differently with this? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just configure it into a lesson. I'm going to assume I'm going to do a traditional lesson with someone who's comfortable with 5-step lesson plans. And the idea of teaching into, through, and beyond is, they like, we teach into a text, prepare you to read, through a text, take you through it, beyond it, allow you to go other places with it and do other things with it. We can do into, through, beyond in any subject area, whether you're in PE or math or anything else. If we just think of a process of instruction in 3 parts, in the into part, what I want to think about is, well, what would be the best configuration for bringing people into this lesson? What decision point am I going to make a third of the way through that will tell me what to do next and how to do it? And how am I going to open up? Well, once you've thought about that, could you in the blue box just put a simple sequence of, okay, what are you going to do at the beginning of this? And then I take them through it. Now, once again, I think what configurations are best for what they're doing through it? What transition points am I going to be at where I'm going to want to do something else? And what options do I have if someone's not getting it? Now, as I think about what's the meat of the lesson, this part of the lesson I've really introduced what's happening. I've checked to see if they understand it. Now what I want to do is provide them more experience so I can start moving really toward more fluency and maintenance issues. And so what is it I'm going to do that's going to allow them to really do something with this? In the yellow box you see, if you would put down the steps of some of the things you might do here. Now remember, what you're really doing is you're taking the learning assets you identified a moment ago, and you're identifying where they fit into, through, and now beyond the lesson. Because as we move beyond the lesson, what I like to think about is, once I've gotten kind of into things, once I've gotten sort of through them and people are doing things, now I want to provide some choices where people, depending where they are in the lesson, how they're progressing, can do different things. If I realize that out of those kind of 6 kinds of outcomes I can have that I was talking about, 6 places I should say students would be a minute ago, I want to have activities for probably 3 or 4 of them, different things people could do at this point. So what I'd like you to think about is, given those learning assets you have, what are other things people could be doing, either in class or online or somewhere else? But what are some options where there may be text, there may be some text you can use, maybe some digital things, maybe a couple different face-to-face things. What are different things and approaches people could use, and how could you bring this whole thing to a close at the end? Which brings me to the end of our time today. What I'd like you to do is to do it. That is, I'd like you to take the worksheets. Now you can just write in chicken scratch or a couple words here. This is just a process for thinking through a lesson, to think how it works. Why are we doing it? Because it's going to be the foundation for how we talk about technology management. Technology management has to be centered on, what will this do to improve instruction for students? Whenever I talk about any tool I'm going to use, how will this tool make things better for students in the school? I'd like to start by just thinking about a lesson, and I'll be doing some more things with that lesson next week as I ask you to think about, okay, how could we flip a classroom with that lesson? How could we better do the things we're doing in this lesson if we had a learning management system that would track the data and provide the opportunities and manage the learning? Wouldn't we, some of you probably looked immediately at those 4 boxes and the beyond stage and said, how am I going to get teachers in my school to have multiple things going on at once? This is where a learning management system can be invaluable in helping students to move in different directions, do different things. We can take advantage of social media. Well, I've talked to you long enough today. This will give you a chance to go through the worksheet, and then we'll see you together next week. Thanks.